Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for being here at the Spring Humanities Festival, but not just the Spring Humanities Festival. This may be an inside joke. The second annual Spring Humanities Festival. It's an inside joke for those of you who were here last year as I kicked this off. When it didn't say the first annual, it just said, because they were a little chicken, to say this is the first annual, which meant they were committed to a second annual. But this is the second annual, which means we're looking around the room to see who's going to lead up the third for next year. It's my pleasure to welcome you all and to kick off this event tonight. It's my pleasure also to welcome back to the URI campus Lynn Pasquerella, who will be speaking in a few moments. Lynn, it's great to have you back on campus. I want to take a few minutes to acknowledge just a few people in the audience, particularly Dick and Ann Beaupre, who've consistently been here to support the humanities, to support the College of Arts and Sciences, and to support the university more broadly. Thank you so much for being here and for your generosity. We have a member of our Board of Governors here, Tom Rocket, and Sarah Rocket, who's a key player in the university community and one of the leaders in our Finish What You Started program. And we thank you both for your efforts and for being here tonight. Just a few words. You know, I'm a scientist, so you'll say, how can a scientist kick off the Humanities Festival?
No one better.
Yeah, no one better. And what I wanted to say in just a few minutes is the knowledge is organized into disciplines. And in my view, the most fundamental of all the disciplines are the humanities. The humanities which connect to people, connect to our sense of who we are and ourselves. And it's interesting because as a university, we are moving aggressively to build interdisciplinary programs, which I think is the right direction for our university to go in. But the connection that I don't want anyone here to lose is that without disciplines, without the fundamental disciplines, particularly the humanities, there can be no interdiscipline. There can be no space to explore between disciplines. And in fact, in my view, it is that space that connects humanity to the natural world, humanity to the physical world, to the social world, that is the key and the opportunity we have as a university and as the academy more broadly to make significant progress in understanding the world and our place in it. So I'm pleased to be here to welcome you all to this festival, the second annual, soon to be the third annual, I hope. Galen was nervous that I would speak for too long. He also was very clear to not allow me to introduce the featured speaker because he'd rather do it himself. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Galen Johnson.
Welcome and thanks for coming. It's so good to see you. And I want to thank, just very briefly, a few people in addition to what the provost did. I knew Matthew in art and art history got the ball rolling on this festival planning last fall semester while I was on sabbatical. And I have to thank him for that. I also want to thank the entire executive committee. Several of you are here. Karen and Naomi and Kat and Eve I saw. And Will Krieger's here too, who also was on executive committee in the fall while I was away. One of our executive committee members couldn't be here, and that's Stephen Barber. And so I'll send out greetings to Stephen on the video cam because I know he's watching the streaming live. So permit me just a few remarks, and then I will introduce Lynn Pasquerella. The humanities are an American invention. In fact, the humanities are America's most original contribution to the university. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the humanities have been the makers of the American dream, not only to be mighty, not only to be wealthy, but to be good people of deep and diverse character. We gather this evening to celebrate these facts. There are by now humanities centers, departments, programs, and funding agencies in several other countries. Yet when I am introduced to my colleagues in Europe as director of the Center for the Humanities, they scratch their heads. In France, there are sciences humaines, human sciences, but no humanities. In his 2012 book, The Humanities and the Dream of America, Jeffrey Harpham states, "The global humanities have an agenda, and that agenda originated in the United States." The first program in the humanities appeared at Princeton in 1930. Turning the page very gracefully, as you see. The first program in the humanities appeared at Princeton in 1930. At roughly the same time, the University of Chicago replaced its Faculty of Arts and Letters with the Division of Humanities. Thus, humanities were born of the interwar crisis about war, education, and democracy. The humanities were grouped in order to create disciplines that described the soul of the American dream. Ever since, the humanities have lived in crisis, always. This is the nature of disciplines that take as their name not knowledge as information, but knowledge as reflection on the human condition, and thereby self-reflection. What humanities provide is something about depth and something about cultural richness that is a kind of wealth of soul of which Socrates spoke, but is not easily quantified. We do our best when the provost requests. Melville's clarion first line, "Call me Ishmael." Milton's "Sing heavenly news." Flaubert's declaration, "I am Madame Bovary." These awaken the human heart and imagination to other peoples, places, and worlds. They engage us with the world, and such engagement constitutes an emancipation. A paradox is that those outside the humanities often grasp these purposes far better than those of us who teach and do our research in these disciplines. Many philanthropists recognize these wider, deeper values and provide their financial support. Some of them are among us, and we thank them. The humanities are again in crisis, and each of our own disciplines within the humanities has its own crises. Sometimes the disagreements and differences overwhelm the continuities and porosities. Nevertheless, we people of the book, the archive, artifacts, and cultural objects are called upon to reinvent ourselves again in the digital age, to reinvent ourselves midst an increasingly corporate university. This is not new. It is ongoing in the American century. And I hope that some of that reinvention will be taking place together with our students in the 2 days of this festival. By now, I think that most of us know the shape of the meteoric career of our speaker this evening. I am proud that Lynn Pasquerella, after receiving her PhD in philosophy from Brown University, became our colleague in the philosophy department at URI for 20 years, from 1985 to 2004. From there, she quickly earned the titles of dean, then vice provost, then provost, now president. We share so many stories, from the days of her URI arrival and courageous job talk, which I still remember. Later, the birth of her twin sons, now college seniors, sharing woodworking projects with her husband, John. I received Lynn's text message about 10:30 p.m. on the night of Halloween 2009, saying that she had just learned of her appointment as the 18th president of her alma mater, Mount Holyoke College. She was inaugurated on September 24th, 2010. I find all of this ironic because it was around 1999 or 2000 that Lynn and I sat together by her pool at the beautiful house John and Lynn have built in Woodstock, Connecticut. And we took a pact that we would not go into full-time administration. Teaching was our calling. Well, I kept my end of the bargain. Lynn and John now travel the world on behalf of higher education, and she lunches with the mighty. But in all their travels, the proudest moment might have come last August when she received a call from Larry Lucchino, President and CEO of the Boston Red Sox, inviting her to throw out the first pitch at Fenway Park. Did you know that, Tom? It's an amazing story. She now has her own Red Sox jersey, specially sewn with her number 18 for that occasion. Maybe you know that her email address is commish@mountholyoke.edu. For myself, I believe she has now achieved a position far superior than Commissioner of Baseball. You may not agree, Lynn. I don't know, you can tell us. From her work in Kenya, to China, to Washington, to Fenway, President Pasquerella is a global ambassador for the liberal arts, educational opportunity for women and the underrepresented, and for philosophy and the humanities. She's our ambassador. She embodies humanities engaging the world. There is no one I would be happier introducing to you to deliver our keynote address than Lynn Pasquerella. Her topic this evening is humanities and social justice. Thank you.
So Galen obviously didn't read the article that Al Killalay and I wrote together, Lying in the Public Interest. Let me begin by thanking my dear friend Galen Johnson and last semester's interim humanities director, Anu Matthew, for their leadership in championing the humanities and for providing the opportunity for this extraordinary homecoming. I mentioned at my earlier talk, the minute John turned onto Route 138, I started sobbing because I miss all of you so desperately. It's such an honor and privilege for me to be back at an institution that shaped both my career and my life. And I'm grateful to President Dooley and Reverend Lynn Baker Dooley for their gracious hospitality and warm welcome. I want to dedicate this talk to my former humanities colleagues here, and especially to Cheryl Foster, whose conversation with me over breakfast one morning turned into a 4-hour discussion that continued into lunch and served as a catalyst for these thoughts. Many of you will recognize yourselves in the examples I offer, and I'm so very proud to be able to highlight the exceptional work taking place at the University of Rhode Island as I'm asked to comment on the promise of the humanities in venues around the world. Exactly a year ago, exactly a year ago this month, Johns Hopkins University hosted a symposium on the future of the humanities, in which leaders of humanities scholarship and education gathered to discuss the potential of the humanities to enrich and inform our lives through the foundation of moral challenges and historical lessons. In his opening address, the president of George Washington University, Stephen Knapp, argued that there is an enduring and irresolvable dilemma that defenders of the humanities must countenance. This dilemma, according to Knapp, results from the fact that as humanities scholars build generalizations in an attempt to illustrate the utility of the humanities, such as the ability to, quote, illuminate the interaction of different cultures, to foster certain values, to criticize traditional assumptions, and so on, the further away they get from the original source of our interest in the objects and events they study. What this means, in his view, is that the academic prestige of work in the humanities is inherently in tension with the social and cultural prestige such work derives from our interest in the humanities. Knapp concludes that those of us who care about the humanities should resign themselves to this inherent difficulty and continue pursuing, on the one hand, the pleasure they take in art and history, and on the other hand, the curiosity that leads them to analyze and explain, without either demanding or expecting a stable reconciliation of the two. Rather than resignation to this paradox, a paradox that poses a veritable continental divide between scholarship and the public, I want to assert that the future of the humanities lies in the cultivation of humanities practice, both in traditional and innovative ways. Such practice is indebted to, and sometimes embedded in, but not reducible to the scholarly tradition. Moreover, unless we recognize the practice of the humanities as essential to bridging the gap between scholarly humanistic traditions and the everyday interest in objects and events that is the basis of aesthetic and other humanistic experiences, then we truly are in danger of falling into the irresolvable dilemma Knapp outlines. Humanistic practice is the key to the survival of the humanities, because these practices are the translation mechanisms through which the relevance of the tradition becomes obvious. So what is the concept of humanities practice that I've posited as a necessity? Stepping back, let's first consider the vast landscape of the humanities, both inside and outside of the academy. For the sake of analysis and clarity, we can subdivide the terrain into 4 separate, if interrelated, regions. I call these regions Humanities Questions, Humanities Endeavors, Humanities Practices, and Humanities Scholarship. Firstly, Humanistic Questions. Humanities questions are everywhere, permeating and punctuating the contours of a life. They are asked on a daily basis by people who might not even think of what they are doing as humanistic, and are often isolated as existential, ethical, or personal reflections. The questions themselves are about the meaning of our world and our existence in the world. These are the matters that often keep us up at night and are at the center of countless coming-of-age stories. Is there a point to my existence? How did we get here? Would my life be worth living if I ended up like my parents? This is a question my kids ask all the time. What, if anything, makes a Jackson Pollock better than the splatter I make when I accidentally drop my paintbrush? Such questions lead to a second region in the humanities landscape, humanistic endeavors. Questions contribute to and emerge as endeavors when the issues that preoccupy us get taken up into shared contexts and engagements. Some examples of humanities endeavors include talking to friends at a bar about Cartesian and Lockean questions of personal identity and persistence through time after watching the film The Source Code, calling an AM radio station to comment on whether an exhibit of Kara Walker's work should be banned as offensive on the grounds that it reinforces rather than subverts racial stereotypes, writing a love poem or attending a coffeehouse poetry slam, discussing the aesthetics of a painting or the injustice of a baseball commissioner's refusal to award a perfect game after an umpire's missed call, attending a hip-hop performance, or engaging in an online forum in which participants are trying to identify the next victim and killer from Harper's Island. Humanities endeavors resonate collectively, even as they explore and express the humanities questions we tend to ask alone. Yet in each instance, in both questions and endeavors, there need not be any recognition that the reflection or discussion relates to the humanities. The individuals involved are not functioning as capital H humanists. Indeed, unless the participants are academicians or cultural professionals, they are unlikely to be conscious of the humanities tradition which engaging in humanities questions and endeavors. Nevertheless, these questions and endeavors are distinct regions of the humanities landscape. A third region, and one most often identified as humanistic in gatherings such as this, covers humanities scholarship. Humanities scholarship is consciously and technically interpretive of both humanistic questions and the objects of humanistic endeavors. While it was once the tradition of humanities scholarship to address humanistic questions in the public eye, this is increasingly no longer the case. With occasional exceptions among high-profile crossover scholars writing in outlets such as the New York Times or appearing on Charlie Rose, today's humanities scholars pursue their passions well away from the public eye, locked into an institutional treadmill of arcane specializations that do not translate well for the more general audiences. Of course, the humanities landscape needs and feeds upon specialization, and I would certainly not recommend abandoning technical and intricate research as a foundation for addressing questions and fueling endeavors, if only as an unconscious backdrop in many cases. But humanities questions and endeavors will persist with or without connection to the tradition of humanities scholarship. Our question tonight is this: how do we bridge the widening fissure, Knapp's continental divide, between the generalization of existential questions and populist endeavors on one bank and the private language of specialized scholarship on the other? My response to the divide identified by Knapp is this: it is not the scholarship, but rather humanities practice that provides the necessary frameworks for shaping public awareness of humanistic questions and engagement with humanistic endeavors. For those of us who are academicians, teaching undoubtedly constitutes the most enduring form. Communicating with undergraduates in the classroom, mentoring graduate student development, delivering the occasional talk on our subject at venues such as public libraries, nursing homes, continuing education forums, and local businesses. But humanities practice can and does encompass much more than this traditional extension of scholarship, and it attracts practitioners beyond the academy. Some examples: documentary filmmakers and television producers whose subject matter explores and expands our understanding of history, resident ethicists in medical, business, and government settings, those engaging in program development for humanities councils and in schools, movie critics, book reviewers, food writers, and others whose work makes a connection between humanities questions and endeavors and the products of cultural expression, counselors working at the intersection of philosophy and therapy, developers of cultural content for visitor center exhibitions at national parks, wildlife refuges, living museums, and civic buildings, radio hosts whose call-in shows examine humanistic issues of the day. I know that each of you can generate additional examples, but my point is this: the bridge of humanities practice must reconnect the tradition of scholarship with the persistence of everyday humanistic concerns and activities. Constituting such a bridge must be taken seriously within the academy if we are to have any legitimacy beyond it. If we fail to connect the tradition of humanities scholarship with the enduring questions of humanity, we may exacerbate the fissure between the humanities and the public to the point of creating an unbridgeable gap. The threat of fissure follows from the fact that much contemporary scholarship has lost touch with the way issues at the center of humanities inquiry gets filtered through ordinary life. Unless we can, in an innovative way, successfully close the gap between the public's interest in humanistic questions and scholarship, none of our self-congratulatory rhetoric about the value of humanities will matter. Humanities programs across the country will continue to be cut as humanistic scholarly tradition is reduced to itself precisely because it has not engaged through practice with the questions and endeavors that resonate with those outside of the ivory tower. We must remember that the stereotype for many, the very notion of the ivory tower as a willful disconnect with the practical matters of everyday life, is synonymous with the humanities. Such identifications fuel the image of the humanities as a luxury and underlie calls for the elimination of humanities programs in favor of vocational and pre-professional programs that are regarded as singularly responding to demands for economic opportunity. These perceptions are also at the basis of contemporary threats to public libraries. In addition to being the depositories of humanistic tradition, libraries provide uniquely open access to millions of Americans. In underserved communities, they are often the central, if not the sole point of contact with the humanities. Think back to Richard Wright's autobiographical novel, Black Boy, how he relied upon stealthy access to library books afforded him by a kindly boss, relied upon the voice of H.L. Mencken in discovering his own inner voice and potential. How will isolated youth, the dispossessed, and those seeking perspective on life's enduring questions find common ground across time and place, ground beyond the contingencies of today's politics and fads, if they lack access to the stacks of a library and the internet services they provide? Therefore, the attack on public libraries, demonstrated through diminishing resources, represents even more limited access to the humanities for those who are already the most vulnerable with respect to economic and social capital. It is no wonder that the humanities are considered a luxury and irrelevant to success in a world that equates long-term happiness with wealth. And while those of us in the humanities may condemn the skeptics for being misguided in their supposition that there might be a better preparation for future careers in a rapidly changing, globally interdependent world, it is time to recognize the extent to which we have perpetuated this misconception. A major factor in this misconception concerns the status of humanities practice in bridging the gulf between ordinary questions and endeavors on the one hand and scholarly research on the other. The bridge is collapsing, hastened by the fact that too often the public intellectuals who play the role of translators are reverting to the language of scholarship. If public intellectuals are only on the side of scholars, we are bound to fail in our efforts to defend the humanities as more than a luxury. I know from my own experience as a bioethicist that a humanist who never steps foot in a hospital and who writes exclusively from a theoretical perspective will not be able to provide frameworks for ethical decision-making in the same way as one who is in the trenches. Consider a case in which the healthcare team believes treatment for a patient is futile, while the family is demanding that everything be done to keep their loved one alive. Being able to analyze and evaluate concepts of medical futility, patient autonomy, paternalism, and moral distress will be inconsequential without one being able to offer insights using language and context that is both familiar and speaks directly to the concerns of each individual stakeholder. Or another situation. A young assistant professor wishes to consult and contribute to a documentary film on, say, the history of an artificial reservoir in a local area. There is rich information to be gleaned on displaced communities in the region, as well as parallel decisions about the public good within American history. The filmmakers cannot afford to hire a consultant, but can offer a small stipend in exchange for high-profile production credit and the fulfillment of creating work that will be seen by many people. Unfortunately, the home department of the young professor does not see this type of contribution as counting toward tenure, since it does not fit easily into the mold of traditional scholarship. And the humanities have been slow to embrace the concept of civic and professional outreach that is commonplace in land-grant and field science contexts. What we're talking about here is a shift in the way we conceive humanistic practice, both within and beyond the academy. The work required to bridge the gap between questions and endeavors on the one hand and scholarship on the other may appear daunting. However, the implications of giving in to Knapp's paradox, thereby abandoning the task of providing frameworks through humanities practice and leaving the fissure to widen, are far-reaching and dire. Inasmuch as humanistic scholarly traditions serve as benchmarks and frameworks for grappling with abiding human questions and concerns, reserving the humanities for those who can afford an elite education or to live in well-heeled communities has profound consequences in terms of egalitarian principles of justice and fairness. The development of a humanistic sense enables individuals to discern the patterns that dominate their lives. And this opportunity should not be the exclusive purview of those like Casaubon. He may have been the most learned person in Europe during the 16th century, but his superior knowledge used in exclusive service to the king did not help him as he was being pelted in the streets by those denied access to his intellectual gifts. Nor did his namesake in Eliot's Middlemarch reap the benefits of such scholarly erudition, sinking into paranoid, bitter loneliness in his inability to apply the very lessons of his theological training. The risk of slipping into Casaubonism is why, when I talked about these issues at a conference of Phi Beta Kappa and the American Council of Academic Deans, I entitled my paper, "The Ketchup's in the Bag and the Check is in the Mail." The phrase is from a popular country song by Tim McGraw called "Would You Like Fries with That?" and is an allusion to the old joke about why anyone would need a degree in the humanities just to flip burgers. But it's also intended to highlight the disparate impact of our failure to connect the humanities with people's lives. The fact is that the humanities will remain secure in wealthy communities and at elite private institutions like mine, which were built upon the foundation of liberal learning and its inextricable link to democratic engagement and civic responsibility. In contrast, the humanities will be under increasing scrutiny at public institutions, community colleges where I began my education, and other state colleges and universities. The real danger is that the humanities will be reduced solely to humanistic scholarship as pursued at elite institutions, disappearing in the process from those vectors, those humanistic practices that have the potential to provide the broadest access. In attempting to redress the risk that the scholarship will become reduced to itself, we should pay close attention to the communication mechanisms that might be employed in constructing the bridge between humanities scholarship and humanistic questions. The scholarship itself does not need to be accessible to the general public, but the humanities practices that draw upon the scholarship to fuel their own momentum certainly do. Otherwise, the practices will fall away. Currently, those who are shaping public discourse and framing debates turn out more often than not to be radio and television talk show hosts, political pundits, and zealots of one sort or another. These debates are also taking place on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and through other forms of social media. Hence, if the humanities rely exclusively on the mechanisms of arcane study to get out their message, thus failing to utilize the most lively vectors for helping people cope with humanistic questions, the humanities, as anything more than an ossified depository of ancient curiosity, will die. Individuals will still thirst for humanistic guidance in seeking answers to their questions and compass points for endeavors, but the humanities as an institution will become nothing more than self-referential as the frames of humanistic practice disappear and the bridge burns away forever. Whether it is tradition or elitism that prevents us from seeing some of our most vibrant forms of endeavor, humanists must pay attention to the new modes of exploring humanistic questions if they wish to sustain and fortify the bridge. Those who seek to defend the value of the humanities must be a visible force in the lives of the broadest segments of society. In the process, we must overcome a disdain for the media and recognize the power of radio, television, music, cyberspace, and popular forms of literature and art. Not all humanities scholars need to serve as public intellectuals, yet those who do must cultivate rich forms of practice and collaborate with those who have technical expertise beyond the academy, including both consulting and exploiting media to get at enduring questions. There are many examples of humanists who are doing just that. Alain de Botton, who became Heathrow's philosopher in residence, roamed from one terminal to another, using his philosophical background to address the everyday concerns of travelers. Jennifer Hoyer, a professor of German literature at the University of Arkansas, teaches her students about the works of Rainer Maria Rilke by appealing to their knowledge of Lady Gaga. Inspired by Rilke's notion that we are what we create and we create who we are, Lady Gaga's depiction of fame recognizes the role of the audience in creating her identity. Hoyer points out that Lady Gaga's attempts to immortalize the listener can be understood by reading Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus. My own introduction to the connection between Lady Gaga and Rilke came when Professor Hoyer was a guest on a daily national public radio program I host called The Academic Minute, which attempts to introduce listeners to cutting-edge research and scholarship taking place in colleges and universities across the country, if in not an actual minute, 90 seconds. Here, too, the goal is to provide frameworks for exploring humanistic questions and more. Naturally, we're talking about NPR here. We will achieve a sounder victory if we can get some airplay on IMUS, but one step at a time. This is what I used to listen to on my way to URI every day. IMUS, well, I won't tell you about that, but yes, I was a fan. Americans can take cues from other cultures in this respect. The English culture critic Melvin Bragg takes up this challenge on a much broader and significant scale. Bragg's BBC Radio 4 program, In Our Time, not only presents listeners with content in the areas of culture, philosophy, history, religion, and science, but also engages the audience through blogs and podcasts. A similar concept can be deployed here, even on the low floors of American culture. Imagine using the 21st century cultural phenomenon of Jersey Shore, for instance, to draw out themes in Boccaccio's The Decameron, or Big Brother to explicate Sartre's most famous point in No Exit, that hell is other people. This is not a means of legitimizing shows like Jersey Shore or Big Brother, but rather a plea for leveraging the objects of popular culture as a mechanism of promoting humanistic understanding. Whether in the airport, classroom, radio, or television studio, humanities practice can attempt to tap into the humanistic endeavors people engage in, thereby constructing a bridge to humanities scholarship. If we relinquish the opportunities that would extend our reach and leave these channels of communication to the media moguls, public discourse will continue to decline. There will still be humanistic endeavors, barroom conversations, friendly debates, post-mortems on movies, but they won't be illuminated by the frameworks of humanities practitioners. And if this comes to pass, if humanities questions and endeavors have no bridge whatsoever to the rich traditions of humanistic scholarship, then humanists lose the chance to engender a sense of wonder, purely for the sake of didactism. A good practitioner is constantly building bridges, and those of us in the humanities not only have to make room for the construction of structures that traverse scholarship and inquiry, we also have to support the cultivation, valuing, and nurturing of these building projects. In the classroom, professors can make the humanities come alive for their students by drawing upon their own scholarship, but filtering it through touch points of student experiences to create frameworks for their students' humanistic questions and endeavors. Outside of the academy, humanities scholars can apply their training and scholarship through service as public intellectuals. This may come in the form of volunteering on state councils for the humanities, giving public talks at local art museums, collaborating with scientists and policymakers in local environmental initiatives, offering dance and music workshops at a community center, contributing to radio and television documentaries, writing book reviews for the popular press, or facilitating public forums on pressing issues of the day. In the past, these more fluid forms of humanistic engagement were recognized and celebrated as an extension of, or even a form of humanities scholarship. Many humanists eschewed publishing in peer-reviewed scholarly journals and wrote instead for literary magazines. They recognized the need to speak beyond their own language game, and perhaps even understood that the reification of narrow technical engagement within humanities scholarship threatens to kill the humanities. Unfortunately, we're at a point in our history when the professional structure of humanities scholarship is alienated from a more widespread humanistic comportment to life, and thus from the very purpose of the humanities. Within institutions that encompass humanistic endeavors, practices, and scholarship, more than ever, there is a one-size-fits-all model, a cubicle life, in which there is a tendency to neglect the most vibrant vectors of the humanities, including teaching excellence, outreach, civic engagement, and literary and art criticism, all for the sake of acceptance among professional peers. Even humanities councils are trending away from public programming and towards supporting individual scholars. These institutional structures and practices reinforce humanities scholarship as divorced from the transformative framing capacity of humanities practice. I'm convinced that conformity to this model actually degrades the humanistic legacy. How then has this trend evolved? One might suggest that humanities scholarship has adopted the mantle of scientism, where the quantification of published articles in narrowly focused journals constitutes the standard of productivity. The reference to scientism is not meant to degrade the work of scientists or their contributions to the tradition of liberal arts. Rather, it's intended to reveal the fact when legitimacy comes through quantifiable research, regardless of how obscure the journals in which it is published, we neglect the living form of the humanities that manifests itself in a multitude of practices, from classroom teaching to service as public intellectuals. Adhering to this type of stark scientism within the humanities, with its publish or perish ideology, has made us complicit in our own demise. Thus, in order for the humanities to flourish both within and beyond the walls of the academy, we need to embrace institutional structures that are themselves humanistic. Humanities activities should be measured in humanistic terms, not by eliminating scholarship, but by broadening what we value as expression of that mastery. At the heart of what we value, first and foremost, should be teaching and service as humanists. As a college president, I'm mindful of the ways in which I can influence the prevailing structures in order to prevent the bridge of humanities practice from collapsing. Within the academy, teaching excellence and public intellectualism must be held in equal esteem with scholarship published in peer-reviewed journal articles and supported by grant funding. The value of these activities should then be recognized through the tenure and promotion process. Yet we need to go beyond these established forms and reaffirm our commitment to developing the humanistic tradition in new and innovative ways, ways that bridge scholarship with enduring questions and collective endeavors. For instance, when I was a professor here at the University of Rhode Island, I had a colleague who used her expertise in aesthetics and environmental philosophy to consult on the creation of Waterfire, a public sculpture that includes the burning of 100 bonfires on the surface of three rivers converging in Providence. She also partnered with a theater professor to use humanistic approaches to communication, which were tailored to scientists who wished to speak about or advocate for changes in public policy surrounding coastal resources. Another colleague spearheaded the use of public libraries in each town in the state to have community conversations around race, class, and ethnicity, using works such as Toy Dorricott's The Black Notebooks, Jonathan Kozol's Amazing Grace, and Anthony Appiah's Cosmopolitanism, to bring together diverse groups of community members for discussion within the libraries. The authors and community members were then invited to the university, where students were simultaneously reading the books as a way of expanding the conversational circles and promoting access to institutions of higher education for ordinary citizens. Still another colleague at another institution used the digital humanities to chronicle explorations of the North Pole. His daily blogs were wildly popular and introduced readers to a panoply of information on the history of global expeditions. They also provided readers with a glimpse into how historians of the future might create archives in the absence of traditional forms of scholarly communication. At many colleges and universities across the country, art and art historians are being used to teach medical students observational techniques they will need as practitioners. Philosophers are applying what they know from studying philosophy for children and using it to shape primary and secondary school curricula. Moreover, humanistic residencies are popping up within underserved populations in retirement communities, hospices, ghettos, psychiatric wards, and prisons. Though these practices are not yet mainstreamed within the academy or within society at large, they remind us that publication is not the only, and perhaps not even the best currency of academic excellence. Humanities excellence includes practice as well as scholarship. And yet at the present, the examples I have cited go largely unrecognized as legitimate forms of humanistic practice within academic institutions. They are happily allowed as a sidebar, so long as the journal submissions stay up. We go so far as to discourage pre-tenured faculty from engaging in too much service, even on and within their own campuses. And we unremittingly insist that scholarship be valued over teaching in the tenure and promotion process. Activities engaging actual questioning human beings, whether in the classroom or the community, drop out of professional focus. And yet, what are the humanities if not transformative for human beings? It is time for those of us within the humanities to call upon academic professionals, public agencies, and philanthropic organizations to be innovators in our own lives. We should encourage private foundations to invest more actively in program officers who can cultivate non-traditional vectors and embrace humanistic practices as another category of what we do. Academic institutions should actively reconsider pathways to recruitment, tenure, and promotion, not by marginalizing scholarship, but by placing it into reasonable balance with humanistic modes of activity in the classroom and beyond. Through humanities practice, we can articulate the value of humanities education in a more compelling way and resolve the seemingly insurmountable paradox arising from the widening fissure between the institutional prestige of humanities scholarship and the enduring questions and endeavors that remain the most fundamental questions in human existence. In doing so, we position the humanities as a necessity that it is and not a mere luxury. But this cannot happen without an honest and perhaps radical reckoning with the extent to which we in the academy have let scientism slip into our own self-assessment, allowing the counting of beans to eclipse humanistic modes of practice as a proper extension of what it is we do. There is something deeply wrong in letting an emphasis on publication occlude the quality of engagement with humanistic questions and endeavors in the classroom and beyond. Humanities practice is the bridge we need to build, not merely to recover a lively but neglected manifestation of training in humanities scholarship, but also, perhaps, to save our regions of thought and practice from slipping into canyoned desiccation, into accusations of irrelevance and illegitimacy and collusion in the growth of intellectual oligarchy, where only the very richest and most prestigious institutions preserve access to humanities traditions. We should not collude, but instead resurrect humanistic models of value and assessment and judgment of our work. Only then can humanities practice bridge the paradoxical gap of scholarly immersion and enduring questions and endeavors. Only then will the humanities be functionally humane. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. I've silenced you all.
Okay, I was not.
Okay.
For me, as a foreigner residing in this country for a long time, but still, born and raised in different culture, you are describing a model which is tremendously American. Because, I mean, Galen was in France, I'm assuming, recently. He can tell you that philosophers are on television in France constantly. You cannot have anything happening without interviewing philosophers. So the humanities have become absolutely part of the political discourse.
Right.
So what I find interesting is why a country, I mean, okay, we know the Americans don't love the French, so I know what the answer could be. But why would, I would say, Europe in general is going to embrace this discourse with the humanity, and why not the US?
That's an interesting question. I was just at a Phi Beta Kappa meeting last weekend in New York, and one of our guest speakers was Andy Del Banco, and he was talking about his new book on what colleges were, are, and should be. And in his 4th chapter, he talks about the emergence of the university in America. And it was really as a means of promoting research and science. And he asks the question of whether there's any place for colleges and what they were originally intended to do, which is to allow people to ask these most fundamental questions of human existence, to search for life's meaning, for who they are, to find a place in the world. And we have steered away from that. I raise the example of Alain de Botton because he does that very thing, and it is common in Europe. There's a seamless integration between public intellectualism and the work that goes on within the academy. And so we need to get over that skepticism with respect to...
Is it elitist? Would the American consider having a philosophical discussion on television on the equivalent of ABC or CBS on the mainstream channel being something totally out of place because the masses will be bored? Or Jersey Shore,
yes,
discussing philosophy?
I think Snooki probably does that all the time, but we just don't. I think that it is a bit of elitism. And, when you look at the news, there is no news. It's entertainment. And it's all about fashion and what the stars are doing and, who's on the latest diet. And it's not about these real humanistic questions that really are at the core of who we are as human beings. And so I think that we do have the opportunity to shape the agenda not only for higher education, but for society as a whole by serving as public intellectuals. Yes.
I just want to thank you very much for your talk. And just recently, I teach a course called Prison and the Arts in Prison, and I'm teaching it right now this semester. And a student came up to me after the class, and he's a science major. He's in, I forgot exactly what science, he's in bioengineering or something like that. And he came up to me afterwards, and he's like, thank you so much for this course. He's like, I'm in science all day long, and all I want to do is just learn how to be a better person. And the overarching theme of the class is how do you give meaning in your life? How do you give meaning to your life when you're condemned to death or condemned to prison, life in prison? And the students have a thirst for this. They really have a thirst for this. And then just a quick second comment that here at URI, thanks to the wonderful encouragement here on campus and the mentoring of Cheryl, Cheryl Foster, we've started a beauty salon. And it's we're going to be doing a radio show very soon. But it's addressed to all things beautiful, and it's a way to bring in people from all across the different disciplines of the sciences and humanities, and with an outreach purpose to communicate in a fun, in a very fun sort of mainstream way, basically what the importance of the democratization of aesthetics is. So.
Yes.
It's just exciting to hear how you're talking.
Oh, thanks. Now, I remember Cheryl, when she first came to the University of Rhode Island, was going around with a camera taking pictures of people's hairstyles as a way of integrating that into her work on aesthetics. And so, yes, it's critically important to meet people where they are in terms of the kinds of questions that they're asking, and to provide that framework. Yes.
I'm curious. Your talk was on. First of all, thank you for your talk, and I love the idea of encouraging this kind of public outreach among humanists. But I'm wondering, even though your talk was on the humanities, does your suggestion that people reach out more, that academics, intellectuals reach out more, does that extend to people in the sciences as well? And if not, how do you model a university that on the one hand seeks to foster humanistic practice among humanists, or formerly humanistic scholars, and on the other hand, research among the people who are doing, you know, the work that does get published, that does kind of make it into the big book kind of circuit.
Yes. Oh, it absolutely extends to scientists, and so it's more important than ever before that people have scientific literacy. We need a way of filtering through all of this information that we have at our fingertips, and we have lost the capacity to search. We're very good at research. We can get anything by just Googling it, but we need a way of figuring out which information is credible, which is reliable, and how it can inform our decision-making processes. So at Mount Holyoke, we certainly have students in the sciences who are doing the same sort of outreach in our faculty as well, in going out and doing peer mentoring and helping people understand complex scientific issues, and partnering with humanists to develop mechanisms for exploring issues in aesthetics and ethics. You want to follow up?
Just a quick follow-up. Would you recommend changing tenure approaches in the sciences along the same lines, that if a biologist were to kind of sponsor a mentoring program, that he or she, instead of kind of having scientific discoveries as commonly understood, instead of having those a measure of tenurability, having public outreach, same thing on the other side?
Yes, I mean, I certainly believe in pedagogies of application, and I think that that's important. So I mentioned in the earlier talk the work that we're doing at Mount Holyoke and URI and the University of Hartford and Brown, where we're doing outreach in communities in the West Lake District in Kenya. And when Tom Boving and Hiro and Emi Uchida develop plans to deliver clean water solutions or establish micro-businesses that will transform the lives of thousands of individuals within rural communities, I think that should count as much as a publication in a peer-reviewed journal article. And if you pass legislation, if you are working in the prisons and doing community action planning and creating cultural change, then we should recognize that as for what it is, an impact that is as important as any other that we could provide. Sorry.
Two things. One, first, I appreciate all of you. You are eye and the impact you've had on Lynn's life, but you cannot have her back. Say that up. Second, I think, I love that you include the thought of social justice in your talk. I think one of the challenges for the Academy is recognizing that these conversations about these deep life questions are going on often in marginalized communities that may have a different language but have the conversation. And so part of that, bringing it to the public arena and having those conversations is valuing those voices and understanding that the Academy isn't the only place that produces knowledge, and that together there's a particular type of knowledge that's produced that advances exactly what it is that you're calling for.
Thank you. Thanks. Paul?
You've alluded to the maybe new institutional contingencies that would support this view. I'm wondering what your view is of how we would prepare sort of a future generation of humanities scholars who are more practitioner-oriented in what you're suggesting, rather than sort of elite, cubicle scholars. Do you have any ideas on how we can prepare sort of a new generation of faculty members and practicing humanities professions?
Well, one of the ways that the provost started off with, and that is through interdisciplinary learning and community-based learning. And so if we can integrate the curriculum with outreach to local communities, I think that is a good example of humanities practice. From the minute students walk on campus, if we can provide them with opportunities to use their education to serve the local communities and in turn benefit from those local communities because they will get as much as they're giving, then that's a good approach. And I know that at URI you do a very good job at providing opportunities for community engagement, community-based learning, and experiential learning.
I'm wondering more about like at the graduate level, students who are pursuing, doctoral degrees who would be in university positions in the future. What might their curriculum or sort of graduate education? It seems like this view requires a new generation of humanities scholars and practitioners, as you're saying, that are basically sort of trained in school in this perspective rather than the traditional. I'm just wondering what the implications are for graduate education. Yes.
Well, I mean, it takes a change in the academy, so I wouldn't want to put the graduate students at risk and say you should go off and do this and then not get tenure when you get a job. But there are many graduate programs. I was telling some of you earlier, my son Spencer, who's at Hampshire, is going off to graduate school at UMass in African American Studies next year. And the program at UMass and the program at SUNY Albany that he was looking at, I mean, they all involve community-based learning, and part of the requirements are to go out and serve the community through the work that they're doing. And we're seeing increasing numbers of graduate programs saying that part of the way that you can serve the profession is by serving the local community and using your work as not only a public intellectual, but in the public humanities. And so, but we have to be forceful in articulating the fact that we're going to value that within the academy and the tenure and promotion process. Without that, and it doesn't matter if I say it either, because as a president I can say this, but it's the advisory committee who's making decisions on promotion and tenure, and it's your colleagues who are judging you. And so it really is a culture shift. It takes all of us to say, we value this, and this is the direction we want to move in. And we think that there's some integrity and authenticity in this approach.
I just wanted to thank you both for your talk and for mentioning the importance of libraries. Thank you.
You're welcome. Cheryl.
Lynn, if I understand you correctly, you're not actually saying we should get rid of scholarship. I mean, there are people who are called to a vocation of traditional scholarship, and the last thing we ought to do is make them all go out and do talks in the public. I think if I understand you, you're saying that in addition to that, and in fact, to enrich that, we need people to be taken seriously as practitioners to bring that to the public. I wanted to ask, do you think if practitionerism became more valued and counted within academic bureaucracies, would that actually enrich and protect the scholarly tradition? So, in other words, that would it be protected and valued for its own sake, and not just for its utility, because there were people out there able to continually renew its value for the public?
Yes, absolutely. And so my own research began in, as we've heard, metaphysics and epistemology and philosophy of mind. I always knew that I wanted to apply those areas of philosophy in medical ethics and philosophy of law, but I could have continued along that path of pure philosophy that wasn't applied, and I think we need to respect that. And I hope I emphasized enough the fact that if you only want to focus on these narrow disciplines within your scholarly research, but you can bring that to bear in the classroom, that's one of the most significant ways that you can serve as a public intellectual. It's through what we do every day in promoting teaching excellence. I can't imagine, this is what Galen was saying, that we did sit down and say there is no more important job in the academy than what you do in the classroom. And so I want to emphasize that. What else?
Thanks for a terrific talk. And I was interested in this use of the word scientism. And it rang a bell in my mind from your earlier talk when you spoke about local epistemologies. And you might have spoken about that in this talk too, but I associated it more with your previous talk. So could you say something more about these kinds of local knowledge or local epistemologies that the university and academics need probably to have more respect for or more engagement with?
Yeah, I think this is what Suri was getting at as well, that if we're going into local communities and talking about how to engage in urban planning without taking into account the lived experience of those living in the communities and an understanding of how they might shape transformation of their communities. I mean, this was the criticism of the Coney film, where, great job bringing this to light, but it's not as if people in Uganda haven't been working on this for decades. And so by ignoring the work that is taking place at the grassroots level and saying, okay, we're coming in to rescue you because here we've got the theory, we've got the solutions, then that marginalizes and disenfranchises the people who we're trying to serve. And so it really is an understanding of the local knowledge that can be brought to bear on the complex problems that we're trying to address.
Well, for example, in your Kenya work in the Lake District, I mean, I'll just be very blunt. I mean, we know about purified water in universities, right?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
So, in an instance such as that, you're suggesting that there are local forms of knowledge that scientists and philosophers and so forth can take advantage of.
Yes.
Do I understand? Yeah.
Yes, so when the team from URI went to the West Lake District, we demonstrated many different ways of filtering water. We used moringa seeds as a natural flocculant. We used clay pot water filtration. We used sand filtration. And clay pot water filtration, even though it's slower and isn't as effective unless you put silver nitrate on, and they didn't have access to that, they liked it because the women were kept busy making clay pots, and that was part of their culture. And so it didn't matter if sand filtration or moringa seeds or any other mechanism was more effective. It was understanding the psychosocial issues that have an impact on whatever solution we're going to propose. And without that, it doesn't make any difference. We can go in and they can say, yes, yes, this is wonderful, and they'll never use it. And so it's really that collaborative learning that is so significant. Anyone else?
I love Academic Minute. I
Okay.
discovered it by accident when I was driving through Connecticut one day. And I think that's a wonderful example of reaching out. And I think you've said we don't all have to be on Academic Minute, or we don't have to have our own academic minutes, but there are lots of ways that we can reach out. And yet, in some ways, it's easier said than done because it takes time. And for those of us who have academic appointments, we're always rushed and trying to find time. And I wondered if you, as a university president, have some ideas about things that chairs of departments, deans, others, individual faculty members can do to facilitate, because I don't think that that conversation that happens between a community and academic scholars is just going to happen if people decide to do it or decide to value it. And yes, I think the tenure and promotion track maybe needs to be rethought, and that will be helpful. But I think there's some real practical advice maybe that you can give for how to reach out to a community. And maybe even, I would be curious to hear how you got Academic Minute going.
Yeah, well, first you should be on the Academic Minute because you do a wonderful job. And I invite all of you to contact our producer at WAMC. It's academicminute.org, 90.3, National Public Radio out of Albany. And how I got involved with that was I was interviewed by Alan Chartock, who is the president and CEO of WAMC, and he talked to me about becoming president of Mount Holyoke. And at the end of an hour-long interview, he said, "How would you like to do a daily radio program?" And I said, "Sure." And so that started 2 years ago in July, and it's been wonderful. So it airs twice a day at 7:37 in the morning and 3:57 in the afternoon, and it really is just 90 seconds of cutting-edge research and scholarship that's taking place in colleges and universities around the world, and it airs on Armed Forces Radio, and you can get it on Inside Higher Ed. There's a link every day, and it just features extraordinary scholars. So today was on new forms of slavery and sex trafficking, and it's on all sorts of things. So that and write op-eds, contribute to whatever public fora you can, and get the word out there about your work, because people are deeply concerned about the kinds of issues that I know you're working on and others in this room are working on. They just don't know about it, and so it's part of our historic commitment to educating for democracy is to get the word out there about what it is that we're doing.
Thank you. Two talks, tremendous. We have a full program of events for tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. and stretching until our closing reception at 6 p.m. at the University Club. Feel free to come and go tomorrow. There will be food, there will be students, there will be fun. Talks are brief, and you can enter and leave as you wish. I also want to draw attention to all of our sponsors. On the back cover of the program, somehow it turns out that when you say festival, and then you say spring festival, as I was saying to the provost at dinner, sponsors seem to get on board. And I love it, and I love all of you for it. I haven't recognized each of you individually, but you're all listed here. And I also wanted to thank Jody once again for co-sponsoring the festival with Women's Studies this year. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Lynn, so much for the great